There are various things you have to remember when you're writing a letter for general training IELTS writing task 1. And one of the main things I always talk to my students about is the layout of a letter, which is, there are some similarities but some differences for informal letters and formal letters. And as an IELTS examiner, I notice that a lot of candidates aren't aware of the layout of letters in English. So I'd like to have a look at the layout of formal letters in this video. So first of all, as we can see, in the top right hand corner you write your address, not your name, only your address. Because I know in some cultures you also write your name and you get confused in English, but in English only your address. And it's on separate lines in the top right hand corner. We then come down over onto the left, and on the left you write the name and address of the person you are writing to. Quite interesting that we also write the name here. And then over on the right we've got the date. Now of course in your actual IELTS writing task 1 you won't be required to write your address and the name and address of the recipient and the date, because the instructions usually say begin your letter dear. So this is for your general knowledge for when you're writing formal letters in English, but you won't actually need this part for the IELTS test. Okay, so after the address and the date, we actually get onto the greeting. And the greeting is always dear and the name. So this will be the person you are writing to, and you'll always begin dear sir or madam if you don't know the person's name, or dear Mr. Smith, dear Ms. Smith if you do. Now you will always use a name here. If the task says write a letter to your bank manager, you will write dear sir, madam, or dear Mr. Jones if that's his name. Don't write dear bank manager or dear manager. I see this a lot with candidates. Then we'll look at the main body of the letter, and we're going to have the introduction and the main parts and a concluding comment. So you will use separate paragraphs to begin your letter and for the different parts. In this video I'm not going to talk about the content of a letter. I'll do that in a later video, sort of phrases for the introduction and the conclusion. Today I just want to look at the layout. And then finally you will end your letter with a formal sign-off phrase, and that is yours faithfully with dear sir, madam, yours sincerely with dear Mr. Smith or dear Ms. Smith. So yours faithfully, if you don't know the name, it's dear sir, madam. Yours sincerely if you do know the name. And then you would put your signature here and write your name underneath. It's worth mentioning that a lot of formal letters also use regards as a sign-off phrase nowadays, especially business letters, business emails. But for the purposes of the IELTS writing test, I usually tell my students just to stay traditional, nice and simple. Yours faithfully, dear sir, madam. Yours sincerely, dear Mr. Smith, dear Ms. Smith. Stick traditional, you can't go wrong. Okay, good luck in your test, and I hope to see you again in my next video.